All right, excellent. So we're going to start now. Hello, a warm morning, a very good morning. Some of you are connected from different parts of the world, so I would say rather a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening to a lot of people who are connecting from different parts of the world. I was looking at some of the statistics. So we have people from connecting from Europe largely, but also people connecting from Asia as well. Asia, a few in Africa, and some people registered from the from Brazil and South America, but maybe they will connect more likely to connect for the afternoon session. Okay, it's too early there. Right. All right. Welcome to this webinar on monetizing risk. My name is Manish Shanbhag. I am with EIPM, the European Institute of Purchasing Management. Okay, and today we are going. I've been working with EIPM since for almost 5 years now, and this is my fourth or fifth webinar, I think. I've done this on different topics. Today we are going to look at this topic on monetizing risks. Okay, and we are today actually living in a situation today with the pandemic. It's a situation which is we are in the middle of the risk, let's say, yeah, and then there are a lot of actions happening around to mitigate these risks. But we're going to focus a little bit more today on monetizing, how we associate a dollar value or a euro value against risks. Okay, so this is what we're going to look at. I have my colleague Eric also, who is connected on this call. So if there are any technical issues, he will be quickly onto it to resolve. Also, he'll be moderating the chat. So feel free to use the chat to send your comments, to pose your questions. Either I will take them at the logical conclusion of a particular topic, mini topic, let's say, or I will take them at the end. So feel free to put in your comments. All right. Excellent. All right, so welcome again. We're going to start off with a quick picture of one of these pictures that made the rounds in the internet for the in the past 2 weeks. Let's say, this is a very common picture that we have been seeing from March 23rd to March 29th, a little over 2 weeks earlier. Okay, and this was about the ship Ever Given, which was blocked in the Suez Canal. Okay, and this is the Suez Canal is, of course, one of the world's busiest trade routes. It handles around 10%, 10 to 12% of the world's global trade, connecting Europe and the Far East. Effectively, I was reading some of the documentation behind this, so learned that there were around 400 ships waiting. Yeah, and then there were others who moved around the Cape of Good Hope, around Africa, basically, to come to Europe, right? But this ship was particularly sailing from Malaysia to Rotterdam, I think, in the Netherlands, and it was stuck here, and which made a huge pile, like a traffic jam, effectively. Now, the important part was looking also at some numbers that were released by a variety of agencies. I just picked up one of the agencies' numbers, where it said that there was effective trade loss, let's say, into quotes, of around 400 million USD each hour. Okay, or roughly around 10 billion USD per day. Okay, so that's a lot of business impact we can see. So already you can see that when we are talking about risks like this, there are always numbers behind how much is the impact, because that gives you an idea of what kind of impact is happening for such events. Okay, and this is what we are going to look at. So the reason for hold on one second. I think Eric, can you also check with Mike? And they said they can't hear anything. I hope the others are able to. Eric, they say they can't hear anything. If others who are able to hear, could you just drop? Yeah, okay, you can hear. Okay, now you can just refresh your page. Maybe you can hear. Yeah, some of them. Yeah. Okay, there are some comments there. You can use Chrome. Maybe you're able to hear better. Sorry about that. So slight technical issue. Right, so you can see the impact that these numbers give, basically, when we talk about, what is the impact behind such kind of risks. Okay, There were a lot of categories. Let's say if you look at categories that were being stuck, or commodities, that some of you, we are used to calling it categories, commodities, families, whichever way. But there's a lot of food that was stuck, livestock. Yeah, I just put in semiconductors there because it's one of the biggest problems that is happening today in the world. A lot of semiconductor shortages in Europe, and especially impacting the automotive industry and some of the other industries that use semiconductors. Okay, so it was just to give you a rough view, and this was on top of the COVID-19 pandemic impact. Okay, so we can see that we are living in risks on a continuous basis, living amongst risks on a continuous basis, right? So the idea is to then find out what are we going to do about it. Yeah, what are the key things that procurement can do about it, and I'll come to the procurement focus. This is what we are going to look at today. Risk, very brief definition. What is the classification of risk? Most of the time is on examples of monetizing risk. This is what we're going to spend more time on, and the others are just to give you an overview of how it can be included in the TCO, and some of the reasons why there is poor risk implementation, yeah, in many companies, right? So purely in terms of risk definition, okay, very classical: any situation that involves exposure to danger, harm, or a loss. Okay, any situation that involves exposure to danger. Now, that exposure might manifest or not is another problem. Okay, the any exposure to it itself is a risk. Sometimes these dangers manifest, so there is an actual danger, there's an actual harm, and there is an actual loss, and sometimes they don't. Okay, the risk remains, but the dangers don't manifest themselves. Okay, and these are multiple types of risks that we can see. There are financial risks, there are health risks for the employees, for the people working, there are social risks. Okay, environmental risks, more and more important this month, in April, on April 22nd, we are going to celebrate the Earth Day on the 22nd, right? So a lot of talk about climate, a lot of talk about environmental risks, operational risks, more closer to to where we are working. Operational risks, supply risks, legal risks, and so on. Okay, multiple types of risks. I just put in a picture of the pandemic as well as showing a virus, that this is a risk that we are living through currently as well, right? So there are multiple types. So what is important is, let's just focus on some of the procurement related risks. Yeah, because in that ocean of risks that we are swimming, the idea is to just look at procurement risk as a priority, and this is what we are going to monetize eventually. Okay, so in terms of procurement risk, we have, again, on the left hand side of this chart, you can see typically supply chain, supplier, and supplier relationships. Everything that is linked to the frontier that procurement is working with, which is the suppliers, right? So there could be raw material risk, there could be control of the supply chain itself, tier two risk coming from tier two suppliers, the complexity of the supply chain itself. Then you could have your tier one, your direct supplier risk, yeah? Financial bankruptcy, let's say. There could be quality delivery issues, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. And then on the right hand side, you have some of the macro external risks, right? Like economic downturn, let's say, yeah, 2008 crash that happened, which disturbed the markets. Some of the natural disasters, yeah, including now what we call the earthquakes and the floods, etc., that happened. Then we are living through a pandemic, yeah, which is, again, people say, likely to become an endemic, which we need to all adjust later on to. Some of the geopolitical risks. Every time there is a decision taken by countries, by governments, there could be certain risks that could be additionally imposed. Additionally, these risks can crop up. Climate risks, compliance, and sustainability. We talked about Earth Day. Yeah, more and more focus on sustainability, more and more focus on compliance. Again, could be due to geopolitical decisions as well, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So these are some of the macro external risks. These are more closer to the companies on the left hand side, as you can see. Okay, so these are a brief view of some of the risks that are focusing on procurement, where as procurement professionals we are all working with them on a day-to-day basis, yeah, especially all the ones which are on the left. Okay. All right, so what do we do with this? I've been working with many clients, and This is one of the classic charts that you might have seen, you might be also working with. Okay, this is one of the classic charts that you might have seen, again, as you might be working with, is how do I recognize these risks? How do I document this risk? Very classical. On the x-axis, you can see the impact, okay, of the risk, and on the y-axis, you see the likelihood or the probability of that risk happening, likelihood of the of that risk happening, actually manifesting. And on the x-axis, you have the impact. Okay, now we are going to focus on the impact part. Okay, but typically, just to give you so here you have, let's look at likelihood first. If you have a likelihood of 1, which means there is a low likelihood of that risk happening. Okay, then you have 2, it's slightly higher likelihood, and 5 is a risk that might almost certainly happen. Okay, due to various reasons, again, that might almost certainly happen. And on the x-axis, you have the impact, right? So the impact, again, being very low impact on business on 1 or 2, and then high impact as we move towards the right, right? So you can see the ones which are in the red zone, which is a high impact and high likelihood, typically are what we call some of the critical risks that we are typically managing. Okay, and then you have the ones in amber, which is medium impact, medium likelihood, or either you have a high likelihood, low impact, or you have a high impact and low likelihood. So these are some of the risks that we see in amber. And then there are some risks which are in green, so low likelihood, low impact, kind of moving towards the left corner here, where we have low impact. And these are cases where we say, what, does it really make sense to work on these? Probably not. We might rather focus on some of the other areas where these risks are more critical. Okay, so this is a good representation. This is a good representation, but the question is, do I stop here? Okay, do I stop here? The question, this is a good representation to show what are these risks that are critical, and then there are sometimes mitigation plans behind. Okay, what if this risk manifests? What do I do? What if this one manifests? Or what if this one? What do I do? Okay, but as procurement, what I've seen over the past few years is more and more companies are now trying to monetize, give a value against those risks to make it more impactful. We saw in the Suez Canal example, when you have a value against 400 million USD of business being impacted per hour, you tend to wonder, is that the stock of the value? Where is the business being lost? What is happening? And so on. So it gives a more profound impact when you talk about the actual value. Of course, everything cannot be valorized. We will see that. But the more you monetize, the more impactful that your message will be. And this is what we are going to see. Okay. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to give you some examples. These are hypothetical examples, okay, of the risks and how we monetize them. And then eventually, when we put in a mitigation plan, we'll see another element to go further on the action plans of containing these risks. Okay, right. So sorry, yeah, before that, the other part is we looked at impact, right? So the impact, this is one I've picked up from a Hanfield article, Rand Hanfield article. So this is where we have the impact, which could be accounted for in multiple ways. Okay, so it could be a dollar impact purely, it could be loss or of customer accounts, it could be loss of market share, whatever is the impact. What is important is to understand how we are putting in place a recovery plan, right? Whenever this impact happens here, okay, for this or for whichever risk that you pick up, what would be the recovery plan? So of course, as we very classically, as we know, the earlier we recover, the lower the impact. So if you look at this curve, which is at the bottom here you have the discovery of the problem, then you put in a recovery in place. Yeah, so the impact is lower, obviously. And then you discover the problem bit later, you put in place a recovery, the impact is going to be much higher. It's like in simple terms, let's say a fire. Yeah, you see a fire, you extinguish it immediately, the impact is going to be lower. You identify it and discover it a bit late, then you try to extinguish it, already the impact is going to be higher. And you're going to spend much more resources, much more complex operations to contain a larger fire as compared to a smaller fire, right? Simple, as simple as that. So the more time of recovery, the higher the impact. You identify and recover quickly, lower the impact. So these are these two curves. So we'll use that notion to look at our next issue. So as I said, we're going to look at the examples of monetizing these risks now. Okay, so as feel free to ask any questions if you have in the chat, and we will use that. I will refer to it later again. Yeah, if you have any questions so far. Good. So now we look at some of these examples. So here you can see on your screen now, on the top, we'll start off with the top. Okay, some of the risks that I, as an examples, I've picked up from procurement. Okay, in a very classical step, if you look at the blue line at the top, yeah, you have identify the risk, which is the first step. Then you identify the likelihood of that risk happening, and before assessing the impact, also identify the recovery plan. Because if you have, this is why we saw the previous slide, if you have a longer recovery plan, the impact could be much larger. If you have a very short recovery plan, the impact can be much shorter, right? So identifying likelihood, identifying the recovery plan, assessing the impact. Okay, and then of course calculate the impact value, mitigation, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we will see that. We're not going through the entire risk management process here. We're just trying to see how we can monetize or the risk, give a value of impact. Okay, so we'll take one by one these examples. Okay, so these are hypothetical numbers, as I said, and these are hypothetical numbers. But what we are trying to do here is give procurement a tool which shows that they are looking at risks in terms of value to the business. Okay, value to the business. So let's look at one example. First line, it says raw material price is the category, and the risk identified is the raw material price will increase by 40%. Right, happens many times. Let's say, especially if you have raw material that is maybe linked to the LME or any other kind of index where you don't have much control, is the market which governs these prices, etc. There could be cases like this. So in this particular example, I say that the likelihood of this risk to manifest is 20%. Okay, so there's a 20% chance that the price will increase. Okay, and then what we have is the impact, and this is something which is critical to understand now. The impact. Okay, now the impact, there are various ways to calculate impact. Okay, and we'll give some of the tips that I have put in later on to impact. But what we are trying to do is, instead of putting this in the chart here, okay, as likelihood is around 20%, maybe somewhere here, and impact being high, medium, and low, typically that is what we saw, or 1 2 3 4 5. I'm trying to actually monetize it, which means saying that the impact for this is $10,000. How it is $10,000? So now my way of calculating it is, there are the additional costs to procure the raw material. It's a simple case. Yeah, there could be much complex calculations behind that. So, but in a simple case, we say, oh no, you know what? There is an additional cost to procure the raw material simply because it's going to increase. So you pay more, or there could be multiple reasons due to which the impact effectively on your pocket is going to be $10,000. Okay, that's the first part. So likelihood is 20%. Likelihood is typically the probability happening largely based on some of the historical behavior of the raw material. Again, likelihood, one cannot guess 100% that this is going to be the case all the time. It is a probability, and that's why the name probability itself says that there is a chance of that being missed, right? So we have likelihood 20%, impact is $10,000. So what we say simply is the impact value is likelihood multiplied by the impact is 2,000. So 10,000 and 20% of 10,000 is 2,000. Okay. Now hold on to that thought as of now. Okay, hold on to that thought. We'll look at some other examples, and we'll come back to the mitigation plan later on, and then revisit the impact value. Okay, let's look at the second example. Late delivery happens many times. Supplier cannot deliver on time. Okay, this is, let's say, it's a high likelihood. For whatever reason, the Suez Canal is blocked, let's say, or the supplier doesn't have resources. There is some issue there. Whatever it is, yeah. Late delivery, the likelihood is high. The impact could be much higher in this case. For example, it could be $100,000. Yeah. And how you calculate it? Okay. If you don't have the product being delivered, or the product being delivered late, the production could be halted. There could be loss of production hours because you're still paying the people who are working on the assembly line, let's say. There could be subsequent sales impact. You know, there could be multiple ways of again calculating, but here again I'm assuming there is one way to calculate this. Is, let's say, if production is halted, there's loss of production hours, and then there's a subsequent sales impact. Okay, this impact is calculated as 100,000. Again, I put the impact value 100,000 multiplied by 40% of that risk actually manifesting is $40,000. Okay, quality issues, same fundamental. The supplier delivering non-quality product, likelihood could be low. Impact is again high because you cannot use that product. But again, you can see that because the likelihood is low, the impact is going to be low in this case. Impact value is low, even though the impact is going to be exactly the same. It's just again a fabricated case where we say that non-quality and late delivery same amount of impact. Okay, but their likelihoods are different. Then we'll look at the fourth line, intellectual property breach. For whatever reason, the supplier breaches intellectual property, you have an agreement, and then say, it starts selling to competition. Okay, and the competition comes up with a similar or similar kind of solution. The likelihood of that happening is 5%, but the impact could be enormous. Yeah, if your supplier is selling to you could lose market share. You could lose market share, which is again potential revenue losses. There you have a possibility of a much higher impact. Okay, so again the same things. 10 million multiplied by 5% is 500 kilo. Okay, then you have more and more issues on data security. These days everybody's, I mean, not everybody, a lot of the people around the world are working from home, let's say, which has put in a lot of focus on cyber security and so on and so forth, right? So there are data security issues. For whatever reason people are working here, there could be issues about client data hack. Okay, so the likelihood is slightly higher in this case, but maybe the impact is 1 million. There could be legal fees, there could be compensation that you need to give, and so on and so forth. So all this is calculated to be having an impact of 1 million. Okay, and then you have 1 million multiplied by 20%, which is 200k. So now what we are trying to see is, here we have an impact value of these risks. Okay, purely, instead of placing these risks on this matrix as to where they are in high, medium, and low, what we are trying to do here is converting them into a value which shows your business stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, what is at stake in the first place. What is it at stake? And in a very classical risk management process, the logical next step to this is, I need to put in place mitigation plans, right? When you put in place mitigation plans, there is a cost associated with that. And now that's what we're going to see now, whether these mitigation plans, or the costs that are associated with these mitigation plans, actually diminish the impact. Okay, we're going to see that in the next slide. So this was just to give you a first example that no matter what the risk, what we are trying to do here is monetize it rather than simply classifying it as high, medium, and low, which is still okay. But to have a more profound impact, we say, let's monetize. Now you can see that whenever there's a quality issue, the impact is around 5,000. Impact value is around $5,000. Where there's a late delivery issue, the impact value is much more. If there's an intellectual property breach, it's $500,000. That's a big risk. So now let's look at the mitigation plans and the costs associated with it. Okay, so this is the key slide for this. If you have to take away one slide from this presentation, I would say you take away this one that you can see on the screen now. Okay, so now um, you look at the risk event. It's the same 5 risks. It's exactly the same risk, just put in a bit more data, and we will explain this data. So look at this risk. The first risk that we talked about, the raw material price will increase. Okay, so there could be multiple mitigation plans. Yeah, you have a cap and floor strategy, let's say, with the supplier, and you negotiate in case the price touches any of the thresholds in the cap and floor model. There could be multiple solutions. Yeah, we're not talking about what could be the solutions here, but the key point is the cost of mitigation. Let's say that this cost of mitigating this risk is $1,000. Okay, whatever is the cost. So you put in place an action plan, negotiation, contract clauses, whatever it is the cost of mitigation is $1,000. Now, whenever you're mitigating, what we have seen is the likelihood and impact. So when you're mitigating any risk, either you work on the likelihood or you work on the impact. Right, either you work on the likelihood or you work on the impact. This is how we define risk, that there's a likelihood and impact factor. So when you're mitigating, you either try to reduce the likelihood of that happening or try to reduce the impact. Okay, so in this particular case, we keep let's say this action plan, the likelihood is still the same, 20%. As you can see, again, I'll go back to the first line here. 20% is the likelihood and 10,000 is the impact. Now with this mitigation plan, I don't work on the likelihood, I work on the impact. So now the new impact is $2,500. Let's say for whatever action plan you put in place, you reduce your additional costs that you have to pay to the supplier, maybe, and then you say the new impact is 2,500 instead of 10,000. Okay, so now the new impact value is the same, 2,500 multiplied by 20, which is $500. Remember, the original impact value was 10,000 multiplied by 20%, so it was 2,000. Now, the return, what we call return into quotes, is simply calculated as, so why would you want to put this action plan in place? To calculate the return, simply we say it's again, there are methods to do this. If you want to do it too mathematically, you can look at some of these theorems called the Bayes theorem, which talks about probability and impact. But we're not going to get there, because that's maybe for more academical purposes. Here we are looking at practical cases that actually happen on a day-to-day basis, right? So the simpler way to put it, to show the impact, is now we have the return, which is the original impact, so number 3 minus 2 and minus 1. So 2,000 minus 500 minus the cost of mitigation, 1,000. So 2,000 minus 1,500, which is 500, that you can see here, okay, on the return column. Right, now let's look at the second line. Supplier cannot deliver on time. We said that, what could be the action plan here? Maintain a high inventory level all the time, let's say, so that if the supplier has issue to deliver, you have the high inventory level. There's a storage cost. There are costs associated with inventory, right? So you have a high inventory level, but you know what? You're going to mitigate these costs quite strongly. For example, the likelihood will remain the same, let's say 40%. And if you look at the previous slide, we said 40%, and the impact is 100,000 due to the late deliveries. And now we say with maintaining a constantly high inventory level, we can actually completely remove this impact of late delivery. Okay, as an example again. So, but the cost is quite high as compared to the first one. The cost is much higher. It's $10,000. Okay, however, now the new impact value is 0 multiplied by 40%, which is 0. The original value was 40,000 minus 0 minus 10,000 is 30,000. The return is 30,000. Okay, now this is another example. The third one is interesting. Okay, the supplier is delivering a non-quality product. You do the same thing, some kind of correction, quality correction actions, let's say, or you have a secondary source, etc., etc. And the cost for this mitigation could be $3,000 to develop a secondary source to keep them on standby, or you have a quality correction mechanism whenever there's a non-quality product, sending back, getting it up, whatever is the cost, yeah, or whatever clauses that you or penalties, etc., whatever you agree. Overall cost of that mitigation plan is $3,000. And from 100,000, the reduction here is 50. So originally it was 100, remember, 5%, 100,000. So now I'm going to reduce it from 100,000 to 50,000. So all this action plan that you put in place reduces the impact by half. Okay, we do the same calculation again. 50,000 multiplied by 5%, which is 2,500. And now you have the original. Now, if you look at the original impact value is 5,000 minus 2,500 minus 3,000. Okay, so this is 5,000 minus 5,500, in fact, which is coming out to be a negative 500. Right? That makes you think now. If there is a quality issue, I want to put in place a mitigation plan. The cost of mitigation is higher than when the risk actually manifests. If the risk actually manifests, I have an impact. Can I do something else? Okay, now the mitigation plan can be changed. The impact can be changed. Maybe you work again on the likelihood of it happening. How can you prevent it? Or you try to do something else in terms of mitigation plan and try to bring the new impact even lower. Could be multiple things to do. So that's why I said these are hypothetical numbers to show you that there could be cases where the impact, the return, is that the cost of mitigating is much higher than the actual cost where the risk manifests. Okay, so there could be cases like this, and then you could have an internal discussion whether it's worth putting in effort and money there or not. So this is one way where instead of saying high, medium, low, and low we ignore, or high we put in action plans, or medium we do something else, it gives you a monetary value against these risks and gives more concrete impacts whether the cost of mitigation will cover these risks. Okay, if you look at now the next two action plans, these action plans are not working on the impact but more on the likelihood. So if you look at the previous example, supplier selling to competition, which is an intellectual property right violation, you could have, let's say, heavy breach penalties, heavy investment in patent protection, whatever it is. Yeah, it could cost quite a bit, let's say 100 kilo euros, 100 kilo dollars. Okay, but with that heavy investment, you say that this is not going to happen at all, because otherwise if this risk manifests, the supplier is going to die. So the supplier will never risk this to go to competition, etc., etc. So I'm going to reduce the likelihood to zero. Yeah, the impact remains the same. I'm not changing the impact. If actually the supplier goes and does something, the impact is going to be the same: market value lost, customer sales lost, etc., etc. But with this mitigation plan in place, I'm going to reduce the likelihood to zero. Okay, so we do the same calculation. 500k was the initial impact, minus zero, minus 100k, so it's 400k. Okay, so it's 400k. Then you have client data hack. Again, heavy cyber security in place, state of the art investment in remote working for your employees, whatever it is. Again, heavy investment. I work on the likelihood, reduction in likelihood. So from 20%, I think, yeah, 20%, I reduced to 5%, which is 1 million multiplied by 5. So it's 50,000. Original was 200k minus 50 minus 100, which is again 50k. Okay, it shows some of the mitigation plans, whether it is positive, negative, just about zero. It actually gives you some concrete information about what is the monetary impact of all these risks. Okay, now internally in your companies, for your categories, there could be multiple ways of calculating this. Okay, and that is why I would rather give the next slide here in terms of what could be the different ways in which you could do the impact analysis, because there is no one solution. It's not like it's a one-stop shop. I go and I get the impact. No, identifying critical and non-critical paths, speaking with different stakeholders. Where would be the blockage happening? Let's say if you have a delay in production, what would be the revenue loss per hour, per day, in case the production is halted till the recovery is reached. Recovery takes 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 1 month or 6 months. It could be, the impact could be different. So you need to go and check with your stakeholders, work on it. Procurement uh, cannot have all these data alone. Very, very, very rare cases, but you need to obviously work with your stakeholders to understand the actual impact. Okay, what is the minimum maximum recovery time, etc. It could be a crisis team put in place. For example, what could be the recovery time in that case? What is the impact? What is the new probability? What is the new impact of the risk? What is the investment cost, mitigation cost to ensure continuity? So there could be finance involved as well, because at some point they will have to probably release the budget for that, and so on and so forth. Yeah, there could be multiple ways to understand and gather this information. So that's why I said there is no one stop shop to do this. Okay, procurement needs to go out there, needs to understand. But what it does is, instead of saying that this is high, medium, low, and instead of the risk management process being just a PowerPoint, okay, I've seen that in some companies. Really good model, heat maps, and different ways, but not concrete action taken. There is the, it's good for the, it's good, it looks fantastic, it looks very cute and very, very pretty as a slide. Okay, but then real action is missing. There's no concrete action plan taken place, because it's high, medium, low. Some companies do fantastic job, they have this action plan even with high, medium, and low. But again, as I said, more and more people are working to monetize them and then use that for the mitigation plans. Okay, so this is about impact analysis. Now, how this can be also used as a part of your TCO. Okay, if you're comparing suppliers, especially if you have to select, let's say you have to select two suppliers, uh, and then you have different elements to compare in these two suppliers. There could be a one supplier which is slightly, let's say, riskier than the other. How do you compare them? When you say, oh, this is more risky, but how do you say it is risky? Okay, you know what, there are costs associated with this, and this is the reason why I choose X, because X instead of Y, because the element of risk here in terms of impact is much lower, right? So the inclusion in terms of TCO. So this is a TCO model that we typically have at EIPM. It's followed, it's coming from a few sources. So effectively, you look at all these costs in the entire life cycle of the product or service. Okay, there are certain upstream costs associated. So the ones in green, I have marked it. I marked a few in green to highlight the fact that the costs of those different risk elements that we see impacted could impact these different elements in green that we have seen. Okay, so maybe there are some upstream costs associated purely to qualify the supplier. If the supplier is falling short, maybe for quality or whatever reason, you might need to invest more money upfront to make sure that the supplier poses minimum risk later on. So there is a cost associated with that, right, which is the qualification cost. There could be one packaging, choosing one packaging versus the other. Yeah, there are certain risks associated. If you're transporting graphite, which is some like brittle, or if you're transporting glass, which could be brittle, maybe the packaging cost could be certain in one supplier. With others, there could be cost differences, there could be technical differences that you want to put forth. So there are different risks, and the cost of mitigation of using a highly more expensive solution is better, maybe, because if you use a less expensive solution and there is a product which is disturbed or destroyed, the risk is higher. So you can actually monetize and show that, supplier X, where you have a price of 100 euros, supplier Y, which has a price of 95 euros, we need to think again. 100 versus 95. Procurement, pushing on savings, there's a likelihood that if price is the only criteria, we look at 95. But then you consider all these criteria as a part of total cost of ownership, including the risks, which say that, we can go with the 95, but if we look at the impact of the impact value of those risks, it will come up to 120, whereas the other supplier with its cost of mitigation comes up to 105 maybe. So let's go with the supplier which appears expensive and purely in terms of price, but overall as a total cost of ownership, including the risk elements, is cheaper. Okay, so this was just to give you an overview of how you could use these different risks, the value, monetizing of risks into the TCO, right? In a very practical, so you could start off, if you haven't done this yet, you could start off with simpler categories, simpler commodities, purely looking at QCD, quality cost delivery issues. Yeah. And then look at the stakeholders, get a feedback, see the implementation, work on more different categories. You could work on a model together with other, all categories combined and so on and so forth. But effectively, to try and put a value against this. I've seen recently again with a couple of our clients who are putting now, or let's say monetizing the cost of CO2, the carbon footprint. So if there's two suppliers, one supplier is having a higher carbon footprint, there is actually a euro value associated with per ton of carbon dioxide released. Yeah, it could be again calculated through various ways. The impact could be either the carbon, the value of the carbon trade that they need to put in additionally. So for a supplier which is polluting more compared to a supplier which is polluting less, where you don't utilize those carbon credits, etc. There could be various cases like this, but again, giving you some examples where you could start off in a simple way, and eventually come up to, once you have the model validated, you could then come up to even bigger and bigger categories, larger categories, more scope of the risk. Okay, great. So this was about TCO inclusion, and then the last part we will come to is the reasons for poor risk implementation. As I said, a lot of the times companies do these fantastic charts, which is great. Some of them are using, some of them unfortunately not. Why are they doing that? Is some of the reasons here. So this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, uh, there is the people are lost in an ocean of risks. Sometimes there could be so many things happening. There's so many things. So idea is, if you look at high, medium, low, and if you have 300 risks associated with it, wow, that's a lot of, you don't know where to focus, etc. So if you have, let's say, impact and a threshold, you say, you know what, you're going to focus on certain risks which are going to have a much bigger impact on business, and which have a higher higher likelihood and higher impact. And the calculations that we have seen, we know monetarily, instead of saying high, medium, low, we know exactly how much is the impact happening in terms of value, and we want to focus on certain areas only. Okay, sometimes the consequences are not known. Yeah, and unfortunately it could happen that, okay, you cannot cover 100% of the risks. Yeah, one of the classic examples, maybe you read it, but I thought I'll tell you anyway, is during the pandemic, when the pandemic happened, when COVID struck last year in March, around a year ago. One of the case studies that I was reading was about the All England Lawn Tennis Club, which hosts the Wimbledon. Okay, apparently Wimbledon has been paying a pandemic insurance for the past 17 years. Since year 2002 or 3 or something, they have been paying a pandemic insurance, you know for the past. And this is one of the very few organizations that has actually benefited and got the insurance claim in the process now of getting the insurance claim for 2020, because 2020 it didn't happen, the event didn't happen, and they had insurance coverage for it. So they were paying around 1.5 million pounds every year for the past 17 years for the pandemic insurance. And the risk actually manifested last year, and they had got the risk coverage from their insurance company. Today, these days, you see with the new regulations, new lockdowns in different countries and so on, even the pandemic is not no more considered as a risk in many countries today. Yeah, so this is a continuously changing scenario, right? And sometimes, as I said again, we don't know the consequences. Okay, that's why there is not follow-up implementation eventually. The lack of value at risk perspective. So this is what we are trying to change through this chat that we have seen. We're trying to change this. Instead of just saying high, medium, low, we are trying to put a value at risk approach. Okay, so now you can see clearly which are the important ones in terms of the dollar or the euro impact. Lack of actual measures. We're trying to measure now. Again, a short tenure of managers wants to focus on savings largely, more than savings and opportunities. Again, short tenure, so want to make sure that I want to get my stuff done, I want to get the optimization done, etc. And there could be a lack of focus on risk there. And sometimes, which I like this last part, where you say you don't get credit for fixing problems that never happen, right? If the risks don't manifest, it's a cost. If the risks don't manifest, it's a cost. And that's the call that you have to take internally, that when you have the impact value for higher impact, you could see, especially if you look at it now, more and more, I gave you an example before, more and more people working from home, right? And a lot of companies had to upgrade their IT infrastructure, making sure that they have the employees have all the facilities, all the right softwares, all the right data protection elements, and so on and so forth, because the companies thought that this was critical. So there is a cost associated, but this cost was actually used because there are other risks that could happen otherwise, right? So when we are monetizing this, it even creates a much clearer view as to some of the problems that we need to fix that may never happen. Okay, and again, largely you don't get credit for fixing problems that never happen, and risks are like this. We are preparing for that. It's like insurance, right? It's like you pay a premium for the insurance, the risk may not be manifesting, right? But you still pay on a regular basis as a part of your expenses, right? So this is something that is important to know, which are those risks that could manifest high, and then you have the impact value. Choose those high impact value risks, see what's the mitigation, whether the cost of mitigation covers those returns, and then look at fixing those problems. Okay, when you give a value, when you try to quantify it, it gives a better solution. Okay, great. So this was about, yeah, implementation. And as a conclusion, sorry, as a conclusion, I would say, um, yeah, this is again a purchasing version of the Maslow pyramid. Yeah, so fundamental needs are risks here. So securing the supply, and this is why we say as a part of TCO, this has to become a habit. Has to become a habit, instead of again moving away from the high, medium, low to actually looking at the impact. Starting off with certain categories could be one idea, and then getting the stakeholders involved, and then refining the model eventually. Yeah, you may not get it right the first time. It's not easy, for sure, because there are so many unknowns, right? But starting that would be great. There are some important needs and good to have. Of course, there are savings and opportunities, but risks fall at the bottom of the pyramid, which need to be dealt with, to secure supply. Once risks have been assessed and dealt with, you relate the matter to the business. How is it impacting the business? Obviously, the strategy that you put in place for risk mitigation has to be in sync with the business strategy and the stakes that are there. So higher the stakes, more investment there to mitigate those risks. And finally, keeping it on the agenda on a continuous basis. Make it a regular part of your reporting the impact, reporting the likelihood, and then thus the impact value, so that you know exactly which are the risks that are much higher in terms of impact, and where you need to spend in time and effort and money and resources for mitigating those risks. Okay, great. So that was what I wanted to share today. The highlight, as I said, if you want to take away one thing, I would recommend you to do take away this one. Sorry, here, about the mitigation, the new likelihood, the new impact, thus creating the new impact value, original impact, and then the returns. It gives you a quick idea of how you can monetize the risk and how the impact is going to change if you have mitigation and plans in place. Okay, excellent. That's it from my side today. If you have any questions, again, if you have any questions, I'm open to answer. Or if you have any comments as well, feel free to use the chat section to post in your comments, questions, queries. Thank you, Meg, Clement. Thank you for the appreciation. Oh, okay, appreciation too, if you want to do that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maxim. Thank you. I hope you can pick out a couple of things and start implementing. Pick out a couple of things, start implementing, because the idea to do this was to say, hey, you know what, this is happening, this is very practical, you could use it in your work. you know Thank you very much, Maxime. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Keith. Nathalie, Nicola, appreciate it. Will the slides be shared? That's a good question. Yes, they will be, for people who have registered. And Eric, are you still here with me? I hope so. Yeah, I'll manage that with Eric. Okay, I'll manage that with Eric. The sharing of the slides, Eric, for the people who have registered. Okay, yeah, it will be done. Yeah, Sorensen, it will be done. All right. No questions? So either it was very clear or not clear. Huh? Usually, if there are no questions, I'm a, I'm a little bit. Okay, great. Elena, thank you very much. Natalie. All right. Good. All right. So if there are no questions, that's it from my side. Huh? Eric, you want to add something?
Nothing else
We'll
for the
share the.
moment. Just if we can remind the next webinar, which will take place the 6th of May, and the theme will be company assessment and certification for organization.
All right. Yeah, that's right. So
Save
company
the date.
assessment and certification, 6th of May.
The 6th of May. Yes.
All right.
Registration are open now, I think, or will be very open very soon.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, so somebody just mentioned Mark Gustafsson. You said, yeah, in quantifying risk could be lost sales, could be overtime pay to workers. Absolutely, this is where you do the impact analysis, and that's where you go on the shop floor, if it's an assembly line, or go to get to work with the stakeholders. Absolutely, absolutely. These are all these areas where you can quantify risk. Thank you very much, Nathalie. Bye bye. How to best develop a realistic and defendable estimate? That's a good question. Again, I suggest you start off with the more simpler ones and verify it with the stakeholders. As a sometimes the risk may not manifest, so it's going to be very difficult for to actually verify it if they don't manifest, right? But in the best case scenario, when you work together with the stakeholders to see the actual impact, that is going to remain, there is always going to remain a slight element of doubt whether that number is exact, but I'm not saying that it's going to be exact, right? But when you talk about people, when you talk to people, when you talk to stakeholders, to get the real impact of what would happen if 1 hour is not okay, I need to pay overtime, I can actually calculate the number, absolutely calculate the number, right? So there it is much more realistic rather than saying high, medium, and low, right? And if it really manifests, which I hope not, for to making the life easy for procurement professionals, I hope it does, these risks don't manifest. But if it does, then you get the real number, then you update the model. Yeah, update the model. But the first time, if the risks don't manifest, is always going to be a certain level of estimation that is going to go in the calculation. To come back to return calculation, we calculate the impact likelihood, but even impact total likelihood. Why don't we compare total impact versus mitigation score? Sorry, mitigation cost. 1 second, let me just read it again. Hold on. Okay, to come back to return calculation, okay, we calculate the impact value as likelihood impact, but if the event happens, the impact is total impact value. Why don't we compare the total impact value? Yeah, it's a good idea. When if it happens, yeah, if it happens, we have a total impact value versus the mitigation score. Why not? Absolutely, yeah. I agree with you, Norden. Yeah, if it happens, then maybe we do look at the actual, which is gives you the real impact, yeah, which is the total impact value. It gives you again in dollars, and then we compare it to the mitigation cost, which is the actual cost of putting in an action plan in place. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, good. All right. So thank you very much for your time again. And thank you, Keith, also for your comment. Thank you very much. The next EIPM webinar, as my colleague Eric has mentioned, it's